Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Kuf Tet Zayin. This week's learning is sponsored by the Storch, Joseph, and Cohen families for the refuah shleima of their dear friend Jenny, Esther Gittel Bat Miriam Va'asher Anshel. We love you, Jenny. Before we get started, just remind everyone, Siyum on Wednesday. So please register if you want to go to a live Siyum in Israel on Tuesday or a live Siyum in your area. Perhaps check with your local WhatsApp group. Maybe they're organizing a Siyum. I know there's a bunch of Siyum planned in different places around the world. So please join us for the Siyum. The one on Zoom will be on Wednesday. We're looking forward to seeing you there. If you register, you get an immediate Zoom link sent to your email. Okay, let's get started with our daf. What we ended with was actually all the way started back on Kuf Tef Amud Aleph, was the Mishnah that basically started saying, the pasuk says, don't take rechaim berechev, you're not allowed to take for collateral. And if you haven't listened yet to Alana Steinhain's Shiur and Din and Daf this past week about collaterals, it's good idea to listen now, get a whole more in-depth understanding of the whole issue. You're not allowed to take items for collateral that the person needs. Okay, we already learned about you're not allowed to go yourself into their house. We had a debate, can the court go into the house or not? But either which way, now we're talking about items that are not allowed to be taken. So we then said, well, because it's talking about rechaim and rechev, there are actually two different parts of the same millstone, which we're going to talk about in a little while. But each part, you're going to have a separate lo taseh because it's saying, don't take this, don't take that, even though it was all said in one sentence, but it was as if the lo taseh applies to both. And then it said, ki nefesh hu chovel, because you're taking away something that this person needs for survival. Now, that's not really necessary. And therefore, there's a debate about whether this is adding an additional lo taseh that you're going to get. We've seen this already many times, that there's a whole bunch of things that you get multiple sets of lashes for, because there's number of different negative transgressions, or not. Is this part of it? Is this something added? Okay, so we have a machloket. We started with Rav Huna's position. Rav Huna says that's an extra one, okay? And Rav Yehuda says, no, it's not an extra one. Ki nefesh hu chovel is actually just saying, don't take anything else that they need for survival purposes. Okay, so we have a machloket. Rav Yehuda says if you do rechaim and rechev, you're only going to get 2, not 3. And the other opinion says you're going to get 3. And obviously, if you only took the rechaim part, right, the bottom part, then it would be 2 or 1. Okay, but the point is this doesn't add anything new, or maybe it doesn't. Then we said, oh, perhaps this is the same machloket as Rava and Abaye. When it comes to the korban pesach, the meat has to be eaten, not raw, not cooked, but roasted. So why does it say but roasted if not to add another negative transgression? That was Rava. Abaye says, no, you don't get another set of lashes for that, because that's a lav shebechlalot. That's a lav that includes a whole bunch of different things, which we understood to mean, well, not just cooked or raw, but, could be smoked, there could be other ways to cook it as well. And therefore, now the definition of a lav shebechlalot is something that's always very complicated, and in different places it means different things a little bit. This sugya is going to be a little complicated because it's not going to be exactly clear what makes this a lav shebechlalot. The most classic example of lav shebechlalot is lo tochlu al adam, which actually means a number of totally different things. There's a lot of things that are forbidden that are learned out from that pasuk. So that's what makes it a lav shebechlalot. It's like an all-purpose, it's got a lot of different things mixed in, a lot of different lo taseh, so you don't actually get lashes for that because it's not a clear cut what exactly this means, because it means a lot of things. Anyway, we wanted to connect them. Yesterday, we saw that Rava, we wanted to think, holds like Rav Huna, and then we said, no, you could explain Rava like Rav Yehuda also. And now we're up to Abaye. So 2 lines for the bottom of Kuf Tef Amud Bet. Abaye amar lecha ana de'amrei afilu leRav Huna. So even though Abaye said in the case of if you eat partially cooked and partially raw, you're going to get 2 sets, but not 3 sets of lashes. Here, he could theoretically say that you would get 3 sets of lashes like Rav Huna. Why? Ad kan lo ka'amar Rav Huna hatam ela de ki nefesh hu chovel. He's now going to say ki im tzliesh and ki nefesh hu chovel are 2 very different things, even though they sound kind of similar in terms of the structure of the pasuk. But ki nefesh hu chovel, he says yeterahu, is totally unnecessary. You don't need it. And kevandi yeterahu shadya arechaim berechev. Since it's extra and totally unnecessary, it must be just reviewing what we just said. In other words, explaining. Rechaim v'rechev you can't take because nefesh hu chovel, which means it's not a lav shebechlalot. Lav shebechlalot is something that's not repeating, it's adding other things, and it's got a bunch of different things mixed in. So when it says rechaim v'rechev, don't take because ki nefesh hu chovel, it's just describing what we already know, and that's why there's no extra. That's why if it's referring back to the exact same thing, that's why, it's a little tricky, but that's why it's not a lav shebechalot. If it's not a lav shebechalot, then it is considered a lav, a negative commandment, and you are going to get an extra set of lashes. So now we're going to say, one second, did I say that right? Yeah. And that's why Rav Huna, who says 3 sets of lashes, will say it there, but won't say it by Pesach. Why is that? So the main thing, again, to understand is, if it's not necessary, and it's just referring back to what we were already talking about, then it's adding an additional lo taseh to what we were already talking about, not adding anything new, different. If we're adding something new, different, that would constitute a lav shebechalot, because then it would include also rechaim and rechev and also other things. But hacha, ki in tzli esh, but in the tzli esh case, which is here, because here is what Abaye was talking about. This is focusing on Abaye. Here really is the rechaim v'rechev, but here in his mind is the context he was talking about. Ki in tzli esh lav yetera. Ki in tzli esh is not unnecessary. It is adding something. Now it's interesting. Before we said, according to Rava, it's adding nothing new, because what else is there besides cooked and raw? Those are your only 2 options. Abaye thinks, no. It's extra. And what's it extra for? Well, and again, it's a little confusing. Once you say it's extra, then it's referring back to, okay, you can't eat it cooked, you can't eat it raw, but it's also telling you other things. Once it's telling you other things, we call that a lav shebechalot. As soon as we put it in the category of lav shebechalot, there's no lashes on. So why not? And here it's a little bit different than, let's say, lo tochlu al adam, because it's not exactly, and this is where I think the sugya is a little difficult. It's not exactly a classic lav shebechalot that we're adding additional lo tases. What he's really going to say is these words come to define when the prohibition applies. And therefore, it's not unnecessary and just referring back to the previous, which would then mean, why would it be referring to the previous if not to add an additional set of lashes? No, it's coming for a particular added reason, which turns it into a lav shebechalot because it's including a number of things. And therefore, since it's including a number of different things, there's no lashes for it. So what's it coming to tell you? Bisha'a sheyeshno b'chum echot tzli, yeshno b'bal tochalna. Bisha'a she'eno b'chum echot tzli, eno b'bal tochalna. When does the prohibition apply? Not to eat things, not to eat the meat raw, not to eat it cooked. When do you transgress that? Only if you eat the korban pesach in its time, when it's supposed to be eaten roasted. That's why they tell you, but eat it roasted, which tells you the lo taseh, don't eat it raw, don't eat it cooked, is only if you're only going to transgress that and get lashes if you cook it and eat it raw, eat it cooked at the time you're supposed to eat sacrifice. What does that mean? Well, the korban pesach sacrifice is a little weird. Most sacrifices you sacrifice and then you eat them. The korban pesach you sacrifice in the afternoon, but you eat it that night. You don't eat it that afternoon. So if for whatever reason you cooked it and boiled it in water or ate it raw that day on the 14th, Erev Pesach, you won't transgress the prohibition, because the prohibition only applies, ki im tzli esh comes to tell you, it's the time when you're supposed to eat it roasted, that's when it's forbidden to eat it raw. So once we say it's coming for that, it now turns it into a lav shebechlalot. Now we're going to bring a braita like Rav Yehuda. So we're done with this comparison. We thought to say Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna compared to Abaye and Rava. We rejected it completely. Okay, both Rava's view wouldn't say I fit with one opinion and not the other, and also Abaye's view wouldn't say I fit with one opinion or the other. Each could explain the other opinion like their opinion as well. Now, Tanya Kavateh de Rav Yehuda. We're now going to bring a braita to support Rav Yehuda. We're actually going to bring 2 braitot. Some people think, because it then says this braita and then it says vitani idach, and there's another braita, and that the combination, Rashi tries to explain why the combination of the two proves. But we're going to go with Tosfot, who says, no, you already prove it from the first braita. The second braita is just an additional braita that they're bringing that's similar to the first one. So the main thing we want to prove here is that Rav Yehuda is braita to support. Rav Yehuda is the one who said there's no extra set of lashes for ki nefesh hu choveh. You only get 1 or 2 sets, not 2 or 3, right? If you take the rechaim and the rechev, which are the 2 different parts of the millstone, then you'll be liable for 2 sets. But there's no 3. There's no additional one because of ki nefesh hu choveh. So now we'll see that there's a braita. Now, it's not really the main topic of the braita, but the braita will mention other utensils that are made up of 2 parts. And they're going to discuss how many sets of lashes. And there's no mention here of an extra set for the words ki nefesh hu choveh. And that will prove Rav Yehuda. Chava zug shel saparim v'tzemed shel parot. Okay, these are 2 things. So if you take a pair of scissors, okay, the scissors, even nowadays, but we don't really view them as this way, are made up of 2 knives, basically. So they're 2 certainly the way they were done in those days, it was like putting 2 things together, 2 kind of, half scissors, that each one is a utensil in of itself or a part. It's 2 separate parts. Or it's tzemed of parot, a pair of oxen that go together. There's all discussion here because oxen are on kelim, and we're talking about kelim, and so we're talking about the yoke of it. Anyway, I'm not going to get too into that, but the point is, we have 2 different things, just like the millstone and the base and the piece that goes on top. Chayav shtayim. So you're liable for 2. Chayav shtayim, period. So if you take this one utensil, but it's made up of 2 parts, just like if you took the entire millstone with the piece on the top, and the base, you'd end up being liable. It's clear from the Torah, you're liable too. Likewise here. But if you took zebatzmo, but if the 2 knives or the 2 parts of the scissors were separate, and you took one and then you took the other, you'd only be liable 1. Why is that? Good question. And the commentaries disagree about what exactly the issue is. I'm going to go with the interpretation that made more sense to me, which is, even though it's also a little difficult to understand, you take one piece. So then you're basically it's like taking the rechaim, okay? But once you then have one on its own, it can't, when you take one, so it's a problem because you've prevented the person from having their 2. Okay, but when you leave them with only one, they can't use it anyway. So if they can't use it anyway, you're not actually taking something that they could have used for food purposes. So, right, and the cows, by the way, what's the connection to food purposes? Because they would thresh the wheat, right, the grains. So it's used for the food process. And one by itself can't do it. You need the pair of them. So that's why that makes the most sense to me. That's why you're only chayav 1. And Tanya, so that already proves there's either 1 or 2, but nobody says 3. Tanya idach, there's another braita that says, Chaval zug shel saparim v'tzemed shel parot. Now here's going to be the same thing. It's just they're going to show you how they get it from the psukim. Yacholo yehe chayav elecha. You might have thought you're only chayav 1 because it's like 1 pair of scissors. We never really think it. I mean, maybe you do think about it, but a pair of scissors. Why it's called a pair? It's the same thing, right? Because it's got 2 knives put together. Talmud lamar lo yahvor rechaim barechev. Ma rechaim barechev shehem miyuchadim shnei kelim v'osim melacha achat. Right? Each one on its own doesn't do anything. But if you take them both, you're chayiv, right? You're going to be liable for both of them. V'chayav al zeh b'fnei atzmo v'zeh b'fnei atzmo, right? And you're going to be liable for the rechaim that you took, and you're liable for the rechev. Af kol dvarim shehem shnei kelim miyuchadim v'osim melacha achat. So anything that's 2 utensils that together do one action, you're going to be chayav al zeh b'fnei atzmo v'al zeh b'fnei atzmo. Again, assuming you took them at the same time. Okay, but again, if you left part with them, it's a useless part, then you're not actually liable for taking that. Hahu gavra de savel sakina. Now we're the chavel sakina. We're now going to have a case, and that's going to take us to the end of the amud at the end of the chapter. Person took a knife, the ashkavta. Okay, difference of opinion exactly what it is, but most people think it's a shchita knife, a slaughtering knife. Mechavre. So he took it for collateral. Now again, that's something the person needs. Okay, you might not need a shchita knife in your life, but we assume people were slaughtering their own animals. So he seized it for collateral, which was forbidden. Ata l'kamei to Abaye. He goes in front of Abaye. Abaye says, Amar lei, zila hadre, give it back to him. Dehare le kli she'osim b'ochal nefesh. This is a kli for ochal nefesh. You have to give it back. V'takum b'din ale. You want your money back? Go to court. Get your money back from court. Sounds reasonable. Rava Amar lo tzarich lamekam b'din ala. Rava says, you know what? You don't even need to go to court. You could just keep the knife. Now, you maybe shouldn't have taken the knife in the first place. But now that the knife is in your possession, you have a migo. What's a migo? Right now, this is something we're going to discuss a lot today. That when something is in your possession, something we've discussed many, many times in this Masechet, right? If something's in your possession, the other person has to prove it's theirs. Why? Because we assume, how else did it get into your possession if it were not that you bought it? So the fact that now you seized this, now you weren't allowed to, you took it for collateral, but it's already in your possession. That means that theoretically, if there weren't witnesses that saw you take it for collateral, you could actually claim, I bought it. And the person wouldn't be able to claim otherwise because it's in your possession. So, because you have the, unless they could prove it, then the burden of proof is on them, really. So because you're believed to say that I bought it, you can actually keep it. So even though you really took it and you weren't allowed to, now that it's in your possession already, that gives you a lot of rights. And Rava thinks that you could take so if your loan that you had out was for $150 and this knife is worth $100, you can keep the knife and with that get your $100 back. So you still maybe could go to court for the other $50, but up to the value of the knife is already yours. And that's because you have a claim now, because if you want to make a better claim, you could just say, I bought it. And it's a little unfair because you didn't buy it and it's a lie. But the point is, you have rights to this knife at this point now that it's in your possession. So now we're going to try to figure out why didn't Abaye hold like Rava and why didn't Rava hold like Abaye? Abaye lately Abaye doesn't think this. Why not? Well, he says, so they're actually, before they even get there, they're going to say, we don't even understand how Abaye could not. Sorry, I read it wrong. It's not that Abaye doesn't have this logic. Obviously he does. The question is, why doesn't Abaye lately? Does Abaye not hold by this? And now they're going to basically bring a different case where we did the exact same thing. And they paskin like Rava. And they're going to ask Abaye, what's Abaye going to say to this? Why does he distinguish between these two cases? That in that case, it seemed like it was okay. In this case, he wouldn't say you could keep the knife. So what's the case? It's actually a case in the 3rd chapter of Bava Batra. So we're going to get to it soon. There were goats. Person was drying up peeled barley in their field, and goats wandered into his field and ate the barley. So the owner of the barley, well, let's imagine the scene. Goats wander into your field, go eat, and they're still in your field. So the guy said, I'll be smart. I'll take Tafis Lahu. He grabbed the goats and claimed ownership over them. Vikatain Tuva. And then he went to court and said, listen, they ate $150 worth of produce. These goats are worth $100. I want at least to keep these goats, and all the more so, I want to claim. Now, nobody knows how much the barley was worth. He claims my barley was even worth more than these goats. Okay, otherwise he wouldn't even bother going to court. Otherwise he'd just keep the goats and be done with it. But he goes to court and he says, hey, these goats came and ate in my field. They ate more than their value, and I want to get back the extra $50. Amar Avoad Shmuel Yacholit on Al Kidei Demeim. The father of Shmuel said he can get, yes, he's got the right to claim this, but only up to, we have no idea how much barley was eaten. So only up to the value of the goats themselves. Okay, you already got the goats, you get up to the value of the goats. And that's why I took the same example, $100, $150, right? The guy keeps the knife, the guy keeps the goats. So now the question Abaye. Now, what's the issue here? The issue is, if he wanted to, he could lie, a better lie, right? In other words, he's believed to say the goats ate $100 worth of barley, at least, right? He's only believed for the $100, not the $150. But he's believed about the 100 because if he wanted to, he could say, I bought the goats. And that's why they were in my possession. Because again, they were in his possession. So now, why can't we say the same thing about the knife? Abaye says, you have to give back the knife. So hatam lav bi, what's the difference? Abaye will answer, hatam lav midi da avida lo shule ula gurehu. Goats are not things that people generally lend out or rent out. And therefore, if goats are in your possession, you have the right to say, I purchased them. But hacha, with this knife, midi da avida lo shule ula gurehu, that's something that people often rent out or lend out. So the fact that I have a shchita knife in my house is not an indicator that it's mine. I can't say, I'm not believed by Amigo that if I make some sort of claim, I'll be believed because if I wanted to, I could have claimed I bought it. I can't claim I bought a knife, a shchita knife, because it's something that people lend out all the time. And therefore, the fact that it's in my possession is no indicator that it's mine because it's something that's so commonly rented or borrowed. That's what Abaye will answer. How do we know this? Well, how do we know that this principle, if there's something that's likely that it was lent out or borrowed, you can't claim some claim because I'll be believed because I could have claimed it was bought, or basically, I can't claim I purchased it, right? You don't have the classic, you have to prove, if you want to get it back, you have to prove it's yours because it's likely you lent it to me or rented it. And how do we know that? The Shalach, Rav bar Avin, Dvarim Hasuyim Lashil Laskil Va'amar Lukuchinem Biyadi, Eino Ne'eman. If it's typically rented out items, then I'm not believed to say it was mine. Okay, so let's say you have someone's cell phone in your house, you can claim I bought it because what else is it doing there? Nobody rents out their cell phone. But if it's an item that people do rent out or lend out, I have your sifter in my house, it's likely I'm stuck without a sifter. I asked you to borrow it, right? Something people would theoretically lend out. So if it's something people theoretically lend out, then I have no claim that this is mine. So now we're stuck because Rava, what's he going to do about this knife? If we hold that you're not believed to say I bought it, then you're certainly not believed in Amigo to say, well, this guy owes me money, so at least I get back the amount. So why did Rava say he could keep it? Rava leitle hai svara. He doesn't agree with Huna bar Avin. Rava, and how do we know? You could say maybe he just didn't hold by this thing about the renting out. But it's not true because Rava, apik zuga de sarbala, visifra de agadate miyatme. There were these orphans, and they had these books of agadata, and they had these special or some kind of scissors that, I don't know if they were special, but the scissors that you use to cut off the extras, I don't think they're special, but scissors that you use to cut off the extra threads when you're sewing, okay, when you're making a wool garment. So there were these scissors they used to cut off the extra string. And the orphans had them. And the original owner said, I lent them out to your father, or I rented them out to your father. So Rabba Apik means Rabbi took them out of the possession of these orphans. Why? Because he said, these are typical items that people lend and rent, and therefore it's likely that the person who's claiming that is right. And Rava didn't give them the right to say, what do you mean? It's in my house. We must have bought it. So since Rava ruled that way, why did Rava not rule that way in the shchita knife? So Amar Lacha Rava, we're going to put words in Rava's mouth and say Rava must have held, Hai nami kevan de mipagma kapde inashe velo moshlim. Why would you think a shchita knife is something that people rent out or lend out? Shchita knives are very fragile. If you get a little nick in them, it's already disqualifies the shchita, because what will happen, we'll get to all this when we get to chulin, but if the nick hits the animal before you cut the veshet, the simanim you're supposed to cut, the esophagus and the trachea, if it nicks the animal first and kills them before you do the proper shchita, then it ruins your shchita. So you could say that Rava claims this is not something people generally rent out or lend out, and that's why the person was believed for a bigo. Okay, and with that, Hadran Alach Makabel, we finished the 9th chapter, moving on to our very last chapter of Bava Metzia. And our very last chapter of Bava Metzia is going to sound very much like, a little bit like the beginning of Bava Metzia, and a lot like the first chapter of Bava Batra, which makes perfect sense. First of all, we often see the end of Masechta connects with the beginning of the next Masechet, but all the more so, if you remember, this whole thing was one long Masechet, so it makes perfect sense, because originally this was just a continuation. We're going to start here about is people who live in the same property. Okay, so we have, in those days, if you ever went to Katrine and visited the Talmudic village, you'll see that the houses had two floors. There was the bayit and the aliyah. The downstairs is the bayit, the house, and the aliyah is the second floor. So we now have a bayit aliyah shel shnayim shenaflu. We have a house that collapses. I was living downstairs, you were living upstairs, and we were each half owners of the house. I owned my half, you owned your half, and now the house falls down. Shneim cholkim be'etzim uba'avanim uba'afal. Okay, we split all the parts. Okay, we now have broken stones and things and everything mixed up. We don't know whose or whose. We split them, we divide them. Now, we'll see, Ro'in, it's not necessarily, it sounds like you split it 50-50, but you also split it based on, if I had a taller, mine was much taller, so I had more stones in my walls, then I'll get percentage-wise, what I had, and you'll get percentage-wise what you had. But we don't say, oh, these are mine, these are yours, because we just don't know. Now we're going to see that maybe there were ways that you could know. Ro'in elu ha'avanim ha'asiyot lishtabel. Well, we try to figure out based on, okay, and it's not so clear from the Mishnah what they mean here, but based on, right, like Rashi says, for example, im yesh avanim shvurot shel levinim, ze omer shlemot sheli, v'ze omer shlemot sheli, ro'im elu avanim ru'iyot lishtabel im shel elyon o shel tachton, v'achol kafi ha'mapolet. What Rashi explains is that if you have broken pieces and whole pieces, and how do we know which are which? You look at the way it fell. Okay, so like if the whole thing collapsed, then we assume, okay, well, what's at the bottom are mine and what's on top are yours, because when a house collapses, right? So obviously what's at the top is going to be what fell from the top. So we try to do some detective work, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the Gemara, as to whose are whose and where they fell and whether we can determine which ones belong to who. If I say, hey, I know those were the stones in my wall, Notzlan, I get to take them. Okay, well, the Gemara is going to ask, well, what was your claim about them? So we don't know. But that counts as part of my count. Okay, so if let's say we were 50-50 splitting and I took these, then those count as my X amount that I took. Now, again, we're not exactly sure what this means, and the Gemara is going to figure out exactly what this means. Okay, does that mean I took these whole ones, you get all the other whole ones? Does that mean I took 25 whole ones, you take 25 broken ones, because we assume the whole ones are mine, then the broken ones are yours? Unclear exactly what this means. Now, the Gemara starts off with, midikatani ro'in, when it says we make an assessment, now we're going to understand what they think the assessment is that you could make. And you can see by how it fell, whether it was from crushing, that's chavsa, okay, like let's say it fell apart at the base, right? And everything kind of, when it started to crumble, so everything at the top pushed down on the bottom ones, and the bottom ones broke because of the crumbling on top of it from the top. Or is it that they fell a long way down, and when they smashed against the floor, they broke? In other words, is it that the upper ones caused the bottom ones to break as they crushed down on top of it? That's the first option. The second option is that, did they break from the impact? This reminds us of Bava Kama with the impact in the board. And then the most broken ones are going to be the ones from up top, because laws of gravity, right? If something falls from up top, and laws of, what's going to happen is when it falls and hits the ground, it's going to smash into many more pieces than the ones that are close to the bottom and they didn't really fall so far. So they're going to be less broken. So basically they say, right, it sounds like that's how we should divide it. Well, if that's the case, why in the beginning did they just say we split it? Shouldn't we just make a clear assessment of whether it broke from, the parts that fell on top of it and crushed them all, or did it break from the impact? If it was from the impact, then it was the top ones that are broken. If it was crushed, then it's the bottom ones that are broken. And then we'll return all the broken pieces either to the bottom or to the top. So why does it even talk about this? We split it. So it must be a case to nafil b'leilya. It fell at night, and we didn't see how they fell. So the Gemara says, wait, you don't need to watch how the whole thing fell to be able to assess whether it fell from the smash or from being crushed, you can see when you look at the scene in the morning. Okay, so if it fell at night, remember, there's no street lights or anything. So we can't really see anything at night, but wait till the morning and look in the morning. You still should be able to do some detective work and figure out by how it looks, how it fell and who's fell. Depending who, so it must be a case. And again, we're talking about the way, when you just divide it randomly, it must be a case where it fell at night. By the morning, people had already moved all the rubble to the side. So let's go find, the good Samaritan that came along and cleaned up the mess of your stuff. And we'll ask them. The Shailes will ask. Okay, elves came in the middle of the night and they disappeared and we don't know where they are and they went off. Okay, some random people from the public domain, that's what the literal translation, and they went off and we don't know who did it. But let's say by the way, this is what we call an ukimta, right? Because then we have to say that the first case in the Mishnah where we say you divide it is this very weird case where it fell at night. By the morning, it was already cleared up by unknown people, and there's nobody we can ask about what happened here. Okay, so they say there's another question though. We should go by hamotzi mechaver alav haraya, which is based on what we were talking about earlier on the daf. Wherever it is whose it should be. So, let's see, where is all the rubble now? Whose domain is it in? And then the burden of proof should be on the other side. Now, it's a little weird because we're talking about a person who was living upstairs and a person who was living downstairs, and now there's nothing there. Why would it be in one's domain and not the other, right? They basically own the same domain. But presumably we're talking about that maybe there was a front yard and a backyard or 1 yard, but they split it 50-50. And, this guy's chaise lounges were on that side and that guy's were on the other side, and they each had ownership rights to different sides of the garden, let's say. So then if it's on one person's side, well, then the burden of proof should be on the other side to prove which ones are theirs. And if they can, tough luck. So now they're going to give 3 possible options of what it is, why you would still do yachloku, and one person wouldn't have any more rights to it than the other. Maybe they shared the yard, okay, or maybe it fell on the spot where the house, when they moved it to the side, it was still where the house is, which means, right, that's area owned by both because one owned the top, one owned the bottom. So it was in a commonly shared space. Inami b'reshut harabim, or maybe the people moved it into the public domain, in which case it was in neither one of theirs domain. Each had equal rights to it. Or now it could be you kept your stuff on the left side of the yard, I kept my stuff on the right side of the yard, but we each were okay about sharing. By the way, their yards weren't, I was making a joke about the chaise lounge, they really used them for storage a lot. They would leave things outside. It comes up a lot. First of all, their ovens were outside often, and other things that they used were left outside. So it could be a place where I don't mind if you leave your stuff on my side, and you don't mind if I leave your stuff on, if I leave my stuff on your side. And we have an arrangement like that, and that's why by it being on your side doesn't really mean that I don't have it, that it's all yours, because I, in general, have stuff on your side and vice versa. So that we've explained already, that element of it, that we'd have to basically neutralize the possibility, make sure that there is no possibility here that you could really figure out whether it's chavsa or chavta. If you could, then, or if it was really on one side and not the other, and everyone was very careful about it, things would be different. The halacha would not be like it said in the Mishnah. Next part to deal with. If I know that these whole ones are mine, I can claim rights to them and take them from you. Well, halama to'en, what was your claim? When I said these are mine, what? Did you agree? Did you not agree? So either kam or in, if you agree with me, pshita, I don't need a Mishnah. That's obvious. If I claim these big pieces are mine and you say, yeah, you're right, I recognize them as yours. So I don't need a Mishnah to tell you I could take those. Of course I could take them. V'lo amar le'in, and if you didn't agree with me, then am I no tell. Then what right do I have? It's my word against your word. Ela da amar le'eni yodea. Oh, now we get back to bari v'shema. It's a case where I said, I know these are mine, and you say, I don't really know, I'm not sure. Then I can take them. Okay, and that's what the Mishnah was telling us. In which case we're going to ask, and this was exactly what happened the last time, a few dapim ago, we had this Bari V'Shema case. It was on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Bet. So, Lema Tavitiyufta de Rav Nachman. If so, this sounds like it's a difficulty. This Mishnah would be a difficulty against Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan's position. Also, last time they only used Rav Nachman, but really it's a question against both of them. Why? De'itmar. Manali biyadcha va'ala omer eni yodea. If I say, you owe me $100, and you say, I don't know what you're talking about, Rav Huna v'Rav Yehuda amre chayat, because Bari v'Shema Bari Adif. So Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda say, you have to pay me because I say definitively and you have no idea. So I have rights to that money. But Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan amrei patur. Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan think that you're exempt because it's my word against yours. So what if I have a definitive claim and you have a suffix claim? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't make my claim better necessarily. I could just lie and say, I know, even though it's not true. So that seems to go against our Mishnah because our Mishnah, again, the way we just explained our Mishnah is, I said, I know the big ones, the whole ones are mine. And you say you don't know, and I get to take them. Why? So they answered just like we answered the last time we had this kind of question. Kida Amar Rav Nachman, like Rav Nachman says somewhere else, which nobody knows where else he says this, but like he says somewhere else, Kigon sheyesh esek shvuah b'nehem, it must be a case where you have to take an oath. And because you don't know, remember this? You say you don't know. So you can't take the oath because you can't take the oath, therefore you have to pay. And that's why I get the whole ones. So just like he said it somewhere else, hachanami kigon sheyesh esek shvuah b'nehem. So now what's a case of esek shvuah? Hechidami esek shvuah. Kedirava, as Rava says, da'amar Rava, manali biyadcha v'ala omer en lecha biyadi el 50 v'ashar ein yodea mitoch she'enei yachol l'shava yishalem. So what's a case where you have to take an oath? If it's a modeh b'miktzah, if you admit to half my claim. So if I say, okay, you owe me $100, and you say that I know I owe you 50, but the other 50 I don't know. Now, if you say, I know I owe you 50, but I don't owe you the other 50, I already paid you back, all you would do is take an oath. You'll pay me 50, you'll take an oath on the other 50, and you don't have to pay me. That's called a shvuah modeh b'miktzah. The problem is that here you say, I don't know about the other 50. I know I owe you 50. Since you already admit to half the claim, I'm not going to go into all the reasons why that is, but it's because we make all these assumptions. You wouldn't have the audacity to totally lie. You're probably lying about part though, and you're this. So anyway, we assume you're lying and therefore we make you take an oath. But if you can't take the oath because you don't know about the other 50, so you can't take an oath and say, I'm sure I don't because you're not sure. So you'd have to pay in that case. And that's what happened here. So now we're explaining our Mishnah already. We explained the top part in a different case. Now we're explaining the middle part in a different case, or the last part, which is, I say, I know these are mine. And you say, I know half of them are yours, but I don't know about the other half. Since you're supposed to take an oath now on the other half and you can't, therefore you have to pay, which means I get the half that I claim are mine. Okay, but then I'm only getting half, not all the ones I claimed. Okay, that's how we explain our Mishnah in a way so that it doesn't cut, or that's how Rav Nachman would have to read our Mishnah in order for it not to contradict his opinion. Okay, obviously the other side, Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, wouldn't need to read the Mishnah differently. The last part about this Mishnah before we go on to the next is, and then we deduct, okay, I get the whole ones, but they count toward, from the stones I'm supposed to get. So Summer Rava Lemema, we're going to have Rava and Abaye disagree about what this means. Rava thought to say, Lafi cheshbon shvuot. In other words, let's say I take 25 whole ones, you're going to now get 25 broken ones. And let's say there's another 50 left. The other 50 will split 50-50. I'll get half the whole, you'll get half the whole, I'll get half the broken, you'll get half the broken. But basically, we deduct from the whole ones I took now you're going to get in parallel broken ones. And therefore, what do we assume this means? It means because you said you didn't know, so your situation is going to be worse because you didn't know, so you're going to end up in a bad place. Abaye says, what do you mean? It's the opposite. If I claim these 25 mine are my whole ones, I know that. I'm basically saying these are mine, but the other whole ones aren't mine. And therefore, I should be the one who's in the worst position now. Too lately, I should get no other whole ones. So I take 25 whole ones, you get all the rest of the whole ones, and then the broken pieces will split 50-50. So now the obvious question, why on earth would I even claim? Let's say I do know that the whole ones are mine. Okay. If I claim that, I'm basically losing out all rights to any other whole one. In Rava's scenario, I get half the whole ones that are left. But here I'm losing all the whole ones. Why on earth would I claim these are mine? Right? I'll basically end up doing something that's worse for me. So they say it must be lamal beina ravcha inamitina dema'abda. These are better quality or unique. Either they're long ones, okay, they're long rectangular bricks, and I specifically want those, or they were mixed better, right? They were a better quality. So somehow I want particular these, and that's why I'm willing to say it, because right, they're mine and I want them back. Okay, they have, you could also say sentimental value to me. Okay, but whatever. That's the end of that mission. Now we're moving to a different case of Abaye Aliyah. The difference here, there, it was one person owned the house, one person owned the attic. Now I own the whole house, but I rent out the upstairs to you. Abaye Aliyah. Nifcheta Aliyah. They don't tell you this, but it's obvious because there's a balabayit here. Okay. Nifcheta Aliyah. If the floor in the roof, okay, on the upper floor, sorry, the floor of the second floor, it gets ruined, and I don't want to fix it. You can basically come in and live in my house and say, I'm here until you fix your house. Rabbi Yosi Omel, now, the roof of the bottom person is the same as the floor of the top person. So basically, Rabbi Yosi says it's not all on the guy from downstairs to fix, but he puts the ceiling part of it, and then the person living upstairs is responsible for the part that goes on top of that, right, which is his floorboards. Okay, so we basically have two layers of what this floor is, floor/ceiling. So each one has to do their side. So now right, so there's the landlord does part, and the tenant has to do the other part. Now the Gemara asks a question that's, I think it's more interesting when we see what their reasoning is, and it's kind of, I think it's funny. Nifcheta bekama. How much are we talking about that there's a hole that that basically you could come live downstairs if I'm your landlord? Rav Amar biruba. We're talking about the majority of your floor. Okay, that makes sense. Shmuel Amar ba'arba'a. Shmuel says 4 by 4 handbreadths. That's a really small space. Now, their houses were used for the most part for storing things, just like we talked about the courtyards. So now the basis of this machloket is like this. Rav Amar biruba ba'arba'a lo. Why? Because there's an assumption if you're missing that space. So you'll come downstairs and you'll say, hey, listen, my vase doesn't fit in my house anymore because I lost this floor space. I'm putting it in your space. Now, if your vase is in my floor, okay, the assumption is, what's the big deal? Anytime you need your vase, you'll come up and down and get it. It's not such a big deal. Ushmuel Amar, and therefore, until you're missing the majority of your floor and you can live there and it's just a matter of some of your vessels being downstairs, it's fine. You can live like that. Shmuel Amar ba'arba'a. Shmuel says as soon as you're missing arba'a and you have to start putting a utensil downstairs, what, every time you need it, you're going to have to go up and down the floor, up, down the stairs. What a pain in the neck. Nobody wants to live like that. Like lazy people who are always in my house, right? Can you go get me something? Oh, I'm too lazy. I don't want to go upstairs, right? So that ain't a dumb. People don't live like that, and therefore you already have rights to come downstairs. Now the final question is, Hechidami. What exactly was the arrangement that allows you to come live in my house? What do we agree on? So Ida Amar Aliyazo, if I said I'm giving you this attic, Azda, we've already learned this before. If you say specifically you wanted this attic and this attic is gone, this second floor, I don't have to give you anything else. It's your tough luck. Remember, we always have this, whose luck caused it? Well, you wanted this and this is gone. If I just said any upstairs floor, then I should be responsible to just give you a different upstairs somewhere else. Maybe I own something else. I don't have to allow you to go into my downstairs area. So I'm a Rava lo tzricha da amrle aliyah zo shani maskir lecha ki salka slik ba'ada v'chinachit chut ba'ada. It must be that I said to you, Rava says, I'm giving you this attic, but as it stands, right, you live there. If it breaks, you'll come downstairs. Well, okay, well, then we don't need a Mishnah to tell you. I specifically said in the arrangement of the contract, I said, you can come live downstairs. So I don't need a Mishnah to tell me what the halacha is. So Rav Ashi understands it differently. El Amar Rav Ashi de'amar aliyah zo she'al gabei bayit ze ani maskir lecha. I said, this aliyah you're getting, which is standing on my house. Now, I already kind of said my house is holding up this second floor. And because I mentioned my house in the arrangement, it's showing that I'm basically committing to you that there will be a house here for you for your floor to stand on. And if it's not, then, right, if the floor has nothing to stand on, then you can come live with me. And now we're going to see that this comes up in a different case, a very similar thing. Rava and Abaye said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, I'm selling you this vine that is draped on this peach tree. And I said, I'm selling that to you. And then the peach tree falls. As long as this vine is still in existence, you have to provide the peach tree. Now, it doesn't have to be a peach tree. It could be just a wooden beam or something, but you've committed to the person that's going to be on something, and therefore you have to provide it. Now, the Rishonim say this isn't exactly a fair case, because that would mean the house got destroyed, like the tree got destroyed, and that's what it was sitting on. But it's a similar thing in the sense that since you connected it to that, you're committing to more than what you're really saying, okay? Not just the vine, but the vine that it's supported by, which means that it has support. So here, the second floor, which is on the first floor, which means that if the second floor doesn't exist, then you can live on the first floor. So what did we do today? We finished off with this machloket Abaye and Rava and how it's not the same as the machloket of Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda about how many lo taseh and mechayim berecheb. It's not the same as the Pesach case. Then we got to this case about someone who took a knife, and is he allowed to keep it for, right? He wasn't allowed to take it as collateral, but if he did anyway, can he keep it? Because is he believed to say, I bought it? And that was the machloket Abaye and Rava, and we saw the ins and outs as to why each one said what. Then we got to the house that collapses. It was owned by two people, and we don't know which parts were which. So whatever we can assess, we assess, or what one makes a claim and the other one doesn't have a claim to make, right? And we had to say it was a motive Metzia case, so we could take the whole one, and then we have to deduct and then we didn't know what we deduct. There were two different opinions about it, how we do the deduction of what they don't get then with that. And then we got to the case of the rental where the floor comes apart and the guy can actually move downstairs at what size, right? And based on how lazy we assume people are. With that, we'll finish for today, and we'll meet up tomorrow and get closer to the end of the Masechet. Wishing everyone a good day, a good week, and Nishma B'Sorot Tovot.